moderator of the next panel is going to be Boris Kalnoky, who is heading the media school of Matthias Corvinus Collegium, and he will be moderating an intriguing discussion about the exposure to energy imports and the rising energy prices. So please give a warm round of applause to Boris Kalnoky and panelists. Thank you so much.
Well, hello everybody. I don't know, do we have any Leonard Cohen fans in the room? If so, you may remember his last album, You Want It Darker? I think we've had some pretty dark news this morning, but I'm sure we can make it darker yet. Our subject right now is the exposure to energy imports and rising energy prices. I have an excellent collection of prophets of doom here, except maybe for Mr. Bacsa. We have Zoltán Ács here, professor at the London School of Economics, currently a fellow at MCC. Please correct me if I get anything wrong. We have Dr. Gyors Bacsa. He is director for strategy at the MOL Group, a big oil company here in Hungary. We have Tuomas, how do you pronounce your foreign?
Perfect.
Tuomas Malinen, an economist from Finland, and whenever I read anything that he publishes, I want to run to some safe place. Then we have Georg Zachman, and I'm sure he will have some uplifting perspectives on how to solve the problems we find ourselves in. So let's just get the basic facts lined up again. We all heard them this morning, but let's just ask again. We have rising energy prices, especially in Europe, but why? Is it the war? Is it the sanctions because of the war? Maybe other reasons still, maybe a late consequence of the COVID crisis. Let's just go around with a very short take on this. Zoltán.
I'm just going to start out and say I'm not an energy expert, and I'm happy that there are other people here that are. As we heard this morning, I thought the most interesting statement was that inflation in Europe is predominantly caused by the increase in energy prices, basically natural gas. And in the US, inflation is caused by, you know, the very famous saying, too much money chasing too few goods. We printed a lot of money, gave it to people, and everybody had more money. Nobody wanted to work, and we ended up with inflation. So why did energy prices go up in Europe and not in the US, right? And the simple answer to that is the US was energy independent before Biden was elected. We were energy exporters. The situation has changed slightly. And Europe is to a large extent, right, an importer of energy. And so when the war broke out, right, and we imposed sanctions on Russia, and then the Russians responded in cutting off energy, you know, it's a two-way street. And so Europe is short of energy. And so to me, the situation is, this is the reason energy prices are up, and how to move forward from this or what happens now is up for debate.
Dr. Bacsa.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I think if we follow this topic, the inflation, I don't think that it started because of the war. And that's what Mr. Ács, Dr. Ács also mentioned, that globally there is a really high pressure on the prices because of the cheap money during the COVID incentivization. So all the government's debt increased by 20-30 percentage points. They were giving out loans or subsidies or loans without interest, a lot of grace periods. So there was a cheap money, out in the market in 20 and 21. In 21, a serious undersupply issues emerged, which were unprecedented before. Production capacities didn't really decrease, but the demand was bouncing back and bouncing up so rapidly that production ramp-up couldn't step up with that. Plus, the logistics supply chain was totally disrupted. So the globalization stopped during the COVID period, especially in the logistics. So the global logistic networks had serious problems, even irrespective with a lot of accidents and stuck ships and burned ships, and which were, of course, it's good for the tabloid, but generally there was a big logistic problem worldwide. So even in 21st, we expected higher inflation rate. But now inflation exploded in Europe, and that's because of the energy and food. I would also mention the agricultural product price increase, and that's affecting now the demand, because usually we say that consumers are inelastic for these prices because they have to consume. They have to consume foods and they have to consume energy. But if both are increasing so dramatically, then they are in problem, and then they are cutting back consumption significantly. So what we will see now, I think in Europe, is a serious demand drop, a serious saving and reservation in terms of investments, everything, which would end up in slowdown, or recession, if you want to call it like that. And to come back from that will take time. So it won't happen just because of a peace treaty or truce that everything will be fine. Now we are in serious economic problem, and to recover, it would take more than just a treaty.
Dr. Malinen.
Well, relating to this question, we have two major problems in Europe: Green parties and the European Central Bank. Remove both, and I will guarantee that in 5 years we have no energy crisis and tame inflation.
Short and sweet. Dr. Zachman.
Yeah, no, I see three problems, and I think the previous speakers already alluded to them. So we had a global energy crisis, and we see that everywhere with increasing oil, coal prices because of underinvestment in the past decade that has been amplified during the COVID times, where we had too little investment and after COVID a significant increase in demand. So, for example, the oil balance kind of unbalanced by about 2 or 3%, so 2-3 million barrel per day less production than there is consumption in the past year. So there is a problem of underinvestment. The second problem is a European specificity. That's the electricity market issues that we are having on the continent. They are dramatic. In the EU, we are currently lacking about 10% of generation from hydro and nuclear. 10% is really a lot. And that's due to the specific problems in the French nuclear power plants and the drought that we observed here and also all over Europe in this year, which is amplifying our third problem, which is the gas problem that we are having. The European gas problem is that Gazprom sent us until last year about 40% of our gas consumption, and this year, essentially in the week before Nord Stream blew up, we were getting 0.5 billion cubic meters per week. A year earlier, we got 3 billion cubic meters per week. So Russia has already since summer last year started to deplete European storages in order to prepare for the war, and has continued that and pushed that further in order to put pressure on European policymakers. So it is part of an economic war between Europe and Russia, and this scarcity of gas led to high gas prices. Now, coupled with the lack of electricity, we have to run gas-fired power plants more to make that up. And that's a very, very unfortunate situation, leading to both extremely high gas and extremely high electricity prices throughout Europe. Now, The problem and solution at the same time currently is the European market. The European market has been extremely effective in reshuffling volumes across the continent. Without the European market, it would not have been possible to supply many European countries with gas because as Russia stopped so many gas supplies, if they would not have come from elsewhere, they would have been already in the dark. And without the European market, France would have been blacked out long ago. So this mutual insurance that we give each other in the European market has helped us a lot, but it also meant that countries that were completely unaffected by the crisis in primary terms are now also confronted with very high prices. So we see countries like Italy or Spain complaining about the high prices, even so they are swimming in LNG and have not enough electricity to begin with. And here we need to kind of find ways to preserve the market to make sure that every home is heated in Europe and every room is lightened. But at the same time, we have to find ways to help the population not to suffer of these high prices, because otherwise the European Union will break apart.
All right, that already delves into the territory of solution finding. How do we solve the problem? Who blew up the pipeline, by the way? Shall we do a small public opinion poll here on the podium? Orban, maybe?
So, right, in whose interest was it to blow up the pipeline? And the Russians didn't have to. All they had to do was shut off the gas. And it's an expensive infrastructure. Why blow it up?
So your answer is not Russia. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Dr. Bacha?
It's a lot
Why
of...
not have a bit of fun on the
Yeah,
podium?
we are not in a private room to guess without risk, but...
You're amongst friends.
Yeah, I would say that it's a good point what you raised, that whose interest is to make cutting of Russian gas irreversible, and that's a question. Because blowing up the pipelines makes the decision to cut off Russian gas supply irreversible. That's
So questions and question marks as well, Dr. Malinen,
I don't know.
Dr. Zachman.
I don't know either, but I think stupid, irreversible decisions are made by many parties.
Okay. Right. So I ask very simple questions often because that's what I learned as a journalist. You don't have to give simple answers, but I suspect the one you'll give now is simply no. If the war stops tomorrow, or maybe the war goes on and sanctions stop tomorrow, will energy prices not be a problem anymore? Dr. Ács? Or the deeper line, because you have already all indicated something to that effect. Let's just nail it down again.
If you follow U.S. policy on the role of Eurasia in the global geopolitical situation, it's been very clear for a decade and very, very clear for the last 5 years that the U.S. wanted to decouple Europe from Russia. I mean, it was U.S. policy to resist the pipeline, and for one way or the other. And if the war ended tomorrow, the U.S. would not be happy if Europe imported or went back to importing energy from Russia. So I think the war is independent of this issue of Europe and energy and Russia. And so energy prices will not revert back to neutral if the war ends, in my view.
Dr. Bacha.
I think if you look at the current forwards, even during wartime, you can see that the expectation is that within 18, 24 months, energy prices will revert back to a more normalized level. But cheap energy price, with this, all these sustainability investments, all the carbon prices that will be built into the energy bill, will make the energy more expensive than before. Europe was relatively benefiting from the oversupply in gas because we had a lot of pipeline connections, there were a lot of infrastructure investments in the last 2 decades, so we could supply from LNG, from Russian, from North Sea sources, from North African sources, and so on and so on. So it was relatively cheap. That's why it was a shock when from 11 euro per megawatt, it went up to 200 euro per megawatt. I don't think that 200 euro per megawatt for gas is a sustainable price, but it won't be 11 anymore. So, and we would definitely divert away from fossil. We need to decrease it from the energy mix to make us more independent and more sustainable. Now it's neither affordable, nor secure, nor sustainable. So we have serious problems with the energy structure, and it needs a lot of investments to make it again competitively priced.
So, Dr. Malinen, is peace the solution or not?
Yes, definitely. But I think the interesting question here is now, what would be the interest of Russia here? How would they play it? If peace would be negotiated, would it be at the interest of President Putin to, let the gas flow normally into Europe, or would he keep on playing this? Because I think he has the upper hand now, unfortunately, because Europe played the sanction card and we are now losing, and they know it. So we, as Europe, screwed up again big time.
So your vision is that there may be an end to the war, but not an end to the pressure in energy prices?
Well, what I understood is that Putin is a strategist to the bone. So there is a longer play here, which is...
You can still keep throttling, withholding gas, even...
Yeah, well, you have to think as an eyes of your opponent, if you may, here. And they see, it doesn't matter how we feel about NATO. Russia, Kremlin considers it as a foe. So they are having a play against NATO here. And I'm quite certain of it.
Dr. Zechman, peace, is it the solution? Don't mind the stupid question.
Yeah, no, prices will eventually go down because markets are economies are organized in a way that if something is too expensive and can be found elsewhere, then new supply comes here and some demand will move away from here. So we will see that some energy-intensive production will leave Europe for other parts of the world. We will see...
Like what?
Like basic chemicals production, ammonia will not be produced here anymore, maybe some glass production, so we will see it. I mean, it makes, when labor became relatively more expensive in Europe than in Asia, we lost the textile industry to Asia. When energy becomes relatively more expensive to the US, more of the energy-intensive industry will move to the US, to Canada, to Australia, to other parts of the world with which we trade freely and beneficially, and then we get other parts of the value chain. I mean, it's not a country cannot amass infinite amounts of money by selling stuff, but then the sharing of labor in the global economy is rearranged. And what Europe did in the past century is essentially, we had coal mines in some places, there were chemical industry there, the coal mines became too deep, too expensive, we started to build them, bring them cheap oil, then the oil deal with the Saudis and others in the Gulf blew up. We started to build massive nuclear plants just to keep this industry structure from the 19th century intact. Then the nuclear became too expensive. We did not, it didn't work out commercially. And then we, towards the end of the Cold War, cheap Russian gas was seen as the solution, and we went into that big time, and it helped again to propagate this picture of a very energy-intensive European economy. It's different in different member states, but Belgium, Germany, Austria, you can clearly see that. In other member states, maybe a bit less so. Now the question is, are we going for the same game again, trying to find now whatever, hydrogen, letting the population subsidize hydrogen imports from Africa to be brought here, or do we do another step at subsidizing nuclear big time in order to keep these sectors here, or do we accept that certain parts of the value chain will be outsourced to other parts of the world, and we get then other sectors because we are in an exchange relation not only in monetary terms but also in goods terms?
Dr. Malin wants to react to that.
Yeah, so let me get this straight. You think And during the time of probably the greatest uncertainty in the world since the Cuban Missile Crisis, while US, China and Russia forced Russia, but they are building their own kind of infrastructure to keep the value chains within them. You think it's a good play for Europe to outsource?
It's an important question, and the question is how do we ensure what kind of the Brussels term is strategic autonomy, but there's two flavors of that, and we're moving a bit away from energy, but it's still closely related. There's one flavor that says strategic autonomy is about autarky. So Germany in 1937, we kind of dig out lignite and produce kerosene from German lignite. Or we say, no, we want diversification. We want a tool set that allows us to buy basic chemicals from 10 different places and make sure that none of the places has more than 10% market share. And if we do that, we are still safe in terms of being able to replace stuff. It's still much better than the current situation where we got 40% of our gas from Russia, 50% of our coal, and 30% of our oil from Russia. It's still much better than that situation. So let's move not to autarky, because that does not work very, very well. It makes us all much poorer. Let's work to a structure where we diversify the stuff that we are getting. And here we might have to rethink trade policy quite substantially, even beyond the framework of the WTO, but that goes really too far now beyond the topic.
Well, yeah, that brings me directly to the next question I wanted to ask, and Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has said in public that it's a good idea to come off all kinds of energy that needs to be imported, not important. Is that even feasible, and how do you see this, Dr. Ács?
If you listened this morning to the Prime Minister, he said something very interesting. He said, everybody will not suffer the same way in Europe. And he said, Germany has deep pockets. They can afford this, at least in the short and medium run. He said, France has nuclear energy. That insulates them to some extent from rising energy. And he said, the Baltic countries have shifted their economies from 1989 into the digital era. If you look at Europe as a whole, right, the recent McKinsey report outlined what also we heard this morning, and what my research shows, that Europe has about a 30% deficit in digitalization and business structures. And right, if I think about that, what it means, and we know this, Europe is sort of stuck in a 20th century energy-intensive economy, making automobiles, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, machinery. If you look at the US transitioned rather effectively into the digital era and to the platform economy, right? If you look at the largest companies in the world, 10 of them are in US, and the next 2 are in China. And can Europe bridge that gap? That's an interesting question, and it's related to the energy. So if I look at Hungary, Hungary has sort of followed the German model, right? 50% of our value added is to export or FDI industries, and we're heavily committed to the auto industry. If I look at Hungary and say, where should we be going? What should we be thinking about? We should be following the Baltic model. Hungary has a huge deficit in digitalization, in programming, in mathematics now, and especially the application of that into industry. And so really, if you'd say, ask, what do you need to succeed in the digital world? You need 3 things. You need talent, talent, and talent. And the best talent in Hungary has left for Northern Europe. But that talent now has the best education that money can buy, and that talent may actually be interested in coming back home. And so then the question is, can we develop the ecosystem here that would make it possible for young people to invent this digital future in Hungary? And so I think Orban is right, trying to go back and live in this energy-intensive world is going backwards, not forward. And moving into the digital era, I think is the only path, or one of the only paths for Hungary moving forward.
So digitalization is the answer, Dr. Bacsa.
I don't know. I rather react on the other topics like this energy independence and independence from fossil energy, and from the Hungarian perspectives, because this is absolutely right that every European country is suffering in a different way. Some of them just because of the inflation, some of them also has supply problems. Hungary is not significantly better than the European average in terms of fossil fuel percent stake in the energy mix. It's roughly 70% is the total energy mix. So not only transportation, but also heating and power generation as well. 70%. And we cover roughly 10% of our crude need. We cover 15% of our natural gas need. So definitely we need to work on the demand to push it down, to as much as possible, you make the energy utilization more efficient, more energy saving projects at every level, at household level, industrial level, transportation level. Whether it's a technology change, whether it's a different technology, or whether it's efficiency improvements, modernization, digitalization, preventive maintenance, whatever. You can list a hell lot of things which will help to save. So that's why I think saving is a key, because we need to decrease the demand. We cannot increase the supply, that's not for sure, because we will have problem with the supply security. But I think we have to have a short-run goal, because changing the entire technology and energy mix is not achievable. If you would like to cancel the fossil from the energy mix, we just made a rough calculation, that would mean 220 terawatt-hour power capacity, non-fossil power capacity, a lot of nuclear power plants, and so on, which would need entire Hungarian GDP. So everything, 180 billion US dollar if you would do it with solar. That would be roughly 90 gigawatt solar or 100 gigawatt just to make it round it up. So it's enormous and unaffordable and very stupid investment. So it's a very much a kind of top-down planned economy. It may work in a short-term goal, but you need to have it as a long-term goal. But it's a good direction to switch from fossil to everything what is not fossil. I would like to also make a lot of caution around the hydrogen. Hydrogen is very expensive and not efficient. Diesel is 3 times more efficient than hydrogen if you would like to use it in transportation. And hydrogen needs water, a lot of quantities of water and big quantity of power. Unless you make hydrogen from gas, when you went back to the starting point, so the same problem, just made a big round around it. So if you make hydrogen from water, you will utilize the water, which is also a scarcity for the future, if you look at climate issues, and you need to have green power, which you would use only to produce hydrogen. So I think hydrogen is rather a solution for heavy industry and maybe for natural gas blending. But let's stop here and don't try to push hydrogen everywhere, because it's not an easy solution and the technology is not there. Electrolyzer is quite expensive technology so far. Outsourcing, and that will be the last one. I think the problem with the European outsourcing, that we are not acting as China and US, so we don't control the areas where we outsource. Outsourcing means, in European terms, giving up, giving away. And if we outsource heavy industry, then we will lose a hell lot of things against US, against, I mean, in commercial trade competition, against US and China, because wherever we outsource, we just don't control it. We don't have South America behind us, we don't have Africa behind us, it's already taken. Where do we want to outsource? We just give it to someone else and we will buy it, and the price 10 years, we will talk about machinery prices, maybe, not natural gas prices.
Right, so far we have digitalization, saving energy, reducing demand for fossil energy, not go for hydrogen, and try to keep our industry. Dr. Malinen, your thoughts on this subject?
Well, I'm going to tell you a real world, a true story. In 2001, there was a discussion in the European Parliament. They were deciding on the future of peat in Europe, and as it happens, Finland has a large quantities of peat. It's estimated that as much raw energy is stored in our peat than all the oil in the Northern Sea. So it's a lot. So in 2001, they had this discussion in the European Commission, and one parliament MIP of Finland, Satu Hassi from the Green Party, personally torpedoed the idea that peat would have made renewable energy. Single woman, single-handedly crucified Finnish energy industry. Let me continue. So, Green Party, let's get rid of
and
the Greens.
woman.
Yeah, she could have been a man, but you know, as this. Well, okay, let's not go there. The other thing is, and I have publicly proposed with one Finnish journalist that the Nord Pool will be cut from the European electricity market. We're not part of it, and we would be energy independent if we would do so. No more high electricity prices in the Nordic countries. And in personal, I think because Germany has been so stupid that they have tied their energy independence or dependence on Russia. If they're so stupid, let them sink alone.
Okay. Just going to pour myself some water. I thought this was going to go on. Dr. Zachman, you've already given your answer to this. You know to autarky, but your thoughts on the interesting things the other gentlemen have said.
I don't know where to start. Give me,
So this is about, let's just get off all kinds of energy that need to be imported and will be fine. Your thoughts on that?
I think we will continue to import energy into Europe. And what I also think is we will relocate some production, but we will outside Europe, but we will also relocate inside Europe. Because, we are having now a discussion in Germany at the moment that I find rather interesting about having different electricity prices in different parts of Germany. And the reason is that in the north of Germany, we have relatively little industry and not so many, not so dense population. And because of that, we have a lot of space for wind turbines and also relatively good solar potential, which means that a lot of the renewables in Germany have been built in the north, close to the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. And now they are suffering because, they have to look at the wind turbines. At the same time, they get the same high price that southern Germans get, and they also have to pay for the transmission lines themselves that bring the electricity away from them. Now, if one can change that, and if one can ensure that, that those that have the renewables build up and the potential benefit from the lower prices, you can see that not only within a country, but also within the European Union, we might see quite some relocation towards the new energy centers. So think of Sardinia or something like that, a place where you have a lot of space, a lot of wind, a lot of sun, and a steel plant that is currently fueled with I think, imported gas. So I would expect that the new European economic geography will slowly but gradually be kind of following the gravitation forces of the new energy vectors that we are having, and that at the end of this of the century, we will have quite a different look into where energy-intensive industry in particular is being situated. Now, the challenge for the kind of the old industrial centers is to somehow maintain the clusters, the agglomeration effects that are present. I mean, you have a huge network of clustering effects. You have not only the cities with the people there, the smart people, the university, the infrastructure. You have the infrastructure of different companies that are doing different stuff, and that's kind of very productive thing that those agglomerated areas are having. We should not pull that apart, but we should try to find ways to slice out the energy-intensive parts of these production processes and bring them to where we in Europe as a whole can do energy more cheaply. And if we start, as Thomas said, to kind of pull apart the European energy market, the result of that will be that we will be all on our own in that. And if we cannot trade energy trustfully among each other, we will kind of lose out so fast against the energy superpowers of the world that we cannot kind of having a system that works autonomously is 20, 30 times more expensive because you need to have all this backup available. And you cannot kind of have geographic averaging. When the sun is shining in Spain, you can store hydro in Norway. And if we start now to say, okay, we put a lot of sand in this gearbox and start to not trust each other anymore about initially signed contracts, I mean, then it's over. Then we can forget about the energy transition. We can forget about cheap energy, and that is also undermining deeply the European Union, because even in the 1940s and 50s, we already had well-functioning cross-border energy transmission, and it was a trustful relationship, and we should not stop that.
All right, you are already beginning to talk now about your vision of a grand European energy deal. I will invite you later to do that in more detail. But before we come to the solutions, I want to do one round where we really think about what consequences will this crisis, let's say, next year have on everyday people. You've mentioned industries going away. We know prices are high, food is expensive. So let's just extrapolate all that and think of the effects it will have on everyday people. And I begin this round with Dr. Malinen, because I think you think we'll all be dead in a year or two, or at least a global crash is coming.
No, but it will probably be dire. I will shortly mention one thing now, which we discussed already. Wednesday was the day when the global financial order again almost collapsed. The Bank of England had to step into the gilt market to basically stop the pension funds of UK holding something around $3 trillion worth of assets from collapsing. And this is the state we are in now in the financial markets. They are extremely fragile because of the central banks, once again, get rid of the ECB. And they are, now what is happening here is that the energy crisis is kind of pulling the floor out of the real economy. How do you think this will end? There are only two options. Either we crash massively, the economy collapses, or then the governments and the central banks will buy up everything and we end up in some kind of a dystopia where, you know, our freedoms are basically taken away. These are the two extreme options. And they will treat average person very differently. First one, the crisis and the collapse, will bring pain, serious pain, but eventual recovery to possibly to a new economy with maybe even European, you know, grand energy plan. The second one will bring just stagnation and the slow destruction of the middle class. And we are in this crossroads. So this will treat the ordinary folk really heavily, but everyone needs to think that should we take a bit more pain now for a more prosperous future, or secure our earned benefits now and become stagnated? That's the question.
Dr. Ács, just 2 weeks ago, in your speech here at MCC at our academic year's opening, you had similar warning thoughts, not quite similar, but still you saw possibly a long period of inflation and stagnation upon us, and you know, with all kinds of consequences on this generation starting out in life. Your thoughts? What will these years bring?
Well, I don't, you know, this reminds me of Harry Truman, who was, for those of you who don't remember, president after Roosevelt in 1950. And someone asked him, what would you like for your birthday? And he said, I'd love a one-handed economist. And someone said, what's that? He goes, well, you know, the problem with economists is on the one hand it's this, on the other hand it's that, and you choose. So you have given us the horns of the dilemma, and neither one looks very good. And I've thought about this a lot. And what really strikes me is that, yes, we want to transition to a greener world, right? And this is independent of the war and everything going on right now. That's a bigger issue. And as an economist, my question is, how much do we have to disinvest from in order to move into a greener energy? You know, how many trillions of dollars are invested in coal power, in oil, and all this? And who is going to really suffer? And will they suffer painlessly and just go into the room and leave us alone? And I think this issue underlies a lot of this, and to some extent, this inflation that we're having, you know, yes, it's the central bank's fault, but the inflation is a gauge of the temperature, and things are getting hotter, not in the environment, but in the economy and everything else. And this disinvestment and reinvestment is going to be very, very painful.
Dr. Bacsa, what can you tell us Hungarians? What will life look like for us next year and the following years?
Okay. I think, okay, let's make a statement. I think the next year will be even worse than this one, that's for sure. In terms of energy supply, for sure. Because, before I going into details, I would like to tell something. My problem with the today pain, that I don't like that it's in any kind of investment into the future. And today pain is just to keep the things running. With old structure, old infrastructure, old energy sources, just simply 10, 20 times overpriced. We are running everything as it was done 20, 30 years ago, or we are even switching back. Because now, for example, the solution to save money is to switch from gas to diesel heating. Again, come on, that was the 80s when people switched. It's not green, it's worse, but it's cheaper. I mean, today, but it's still relatively expensive. I mean, who the hell wants to burn oil for heating, for steam, for industry? Big industrial players, chemical players are now switching from natural gas to gas oil. Come on. I think, I thought we are over that. And that's why I say that, and it's very expensive. We are burning money, households burning money, companies burning money. So the pain is worthless in terms of transition. It's not going to the right direction. It's just to sustain, to survive, to keep it running. So going back, why is it problematic next year? Because we are burning the reserves, burning the financial reserves, and we are burning the natural gas, oil, and other reserves as well. This year, winter, you shouldn't be afraid. 95 billion cubic meters are in the storage. So if there is no more Russian gas from tomorrow, 2-3 months of Europe is covered from the storage, because 50 billion cubic meter already stored in from Russia. But if we cut, there is nothing from Russia next year, and maybe there is nothing in the storage. So then comes the problem, where we get it from within 1 year. And now the Baltic pipeline is given, okay, 10 billion cubic meter till Poland. The interconnectors are not ready, so to take it to the region, just for Central European region, would need 46 billion cubic meter to entirely replace the Russian gas. And still, the interconnectors are there, but the supply, the LNG terminals are not upgraded yet, not extended yet. It takes 2 years to do it, but if we shut down all the Russian supply today, then we will have a freezing cold winter in 23.
I told you it was going to be a darker moment, this podium. All right?
So
Suffering, yeah?
maybe on your...
How will we suffer? Just how will we... Who will suffer?
Who will suffer?
The grand project.
No, I would like
to
come in with a bit more optimistic note. I mean, what we have already achieved this year in terms of displacing Russian gas has been quite impressive. I mean, we essentially saw in the first 9 months of the year a reduction of, I think, more than 50 BCM of Russian imports. And
please tell our audience what that is.
50 billion cubic meters. Yeah, a cubic meter is it's about 50 kilometers cube. So it's a lot of gas. And this cube we didn't get, and we replaced that by essentially LNG that we got. And on top of that, we had to fill our storages by additional 40 BCM more because our storages were empty last year. And we managed that a bit with demand reduction of 38 billion cubic meters. So we are, in volume terms, looking much better than anybody would have expected at the beginning of the year. At the beginning of the year, everybody would have said, we cannot do it, or many people thought, but in volume terms, we will manage. So the problem that we are now going to have to solve is the price issue. On the price issue, we currently see member states stepping in with tools like in Hungary, where some basic consumption is given at lower prices to the population. Many countries are doing that, but that will relatively quickly become fiscally unsustainable, well, because it's very, very expensive. But for now, that will shield maybe 1 year. And in the meantime, we will have to find additional volumes or better ways to save energy, to bring down prices to levels that we can again work in a way that is feasible as before the crisis. But I agree with all the three previous speakers that we are in a different world after the 24th of February. We are in a world where people have to invest in military capability because borders are not secure anymore. We have to invest in energy security to the tune of 1 or 2% of GDP annually, which is massive additional investment compared to what we had what we had before. And the question is whether we can do that through increasing debt, because debt level in some member states would still allow that, or whether we would essentially have to say, no, we have to reduce our consumption and our welfare now. And that is going to be politically extremely difficult, as we have seen in Italy at the beginning of the week. So that's the dire choice that we have, and we need to kind of move this balance between how much of the investment do we do? How quickly do we do them to get quicker out of the crisis? And at the same time, how much can we put on the shoulders of the population to still accept going there?
So we'll be all fine next year, technically speaking.
Oh, we will be much worse off than this year, and I think we need to tell population that this is a wartime situation. And I mean, we were lucky enough to not.
Who will suffer the most?
Who will suffer the most? I mean, it will depend on politics. Now, politics will decide on how the buffer is being distributed in the population and also in the European Union. So. Currently, all the discussions that are happening in the capitals are about who is going to be buffered, and different capitals will come to very
different. For instance, Viktor Orban has said the lowest earning 40% of the population should be especially protected. Would you agree with that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
All right. Good. So how do we solve the problem? And maybe you can go right on and mention your grand energy deal.
Yeah, at Bruegel we have been working for essentially the last year on energy matters much more forcefully. So I can also invite you to have a look on the website where we have a lot of data on European energy systems. And what we sort is that we have essentially a big dilemma in the European energy market. That if one country tries to massively reduce consumption at the detriment of its population, so forcing people to reduce less is politically not very nice. Nobody likes to do it. Or if you bring in additional production from dirty or unliked sources, such as German nuclear power plants or lignite-fired power plants, or switching from clean gas to much more dirty oil, then that is politically, in this country, not very nice. The problem is that the benefit of that will dilute in the European market because everybody will see the lower price. So if the German Chancellor decides to bring back all the nuclear plants, all the coal, force population to reduce consumption, and then the price reduction will be relatively modest because everybody in Europe benefits, that's a non-starter for him politically. So what we need is that the heads of state and government get together, talk to each other and say, we all bring and throw into the head what we have in terms of demand reduction potential, in terms of supply increase potential in the short term, because that would make a substantial dent into the cost of energy, because demand and supply curve, as economists think about it, would cross each other at a much lower price level. And this is the essentially only sustainable solution to the problem, because all the price caps that we are currently discussing are just about taking money either from the state or from some other actor and trying to redistribute it. But overall, we are still paying a lot of money to Norway and the US and everybody else. With this proposal of the grand bargain, this money stays in Europe.
Dr. Ács, a deeper Europe, more Europe, is that the solution?
Well, let me sort of take a different cut at this. And the first point I would make is who's going to suffer the most is going to be the bottom 50%. I have no doubt that the top 20%, the so-called elites, technocrats, they're going to be fine, right? They can afford these energy prices, and governments can't afford to help the people, the bottom 50%. So what that means, I don't know. Will they all be quiet? Will they put their sweaters on? You know, will they wear long underwear like we did in the 18th century? I mean, you can do all this.
It's good for the textile industry, though.
Pardon me?
It's good for the textile industry.
Good for the textile industry, which is in China now or Bangladesh, right? The other question I think it's worth asking, independent of the short-run problems, which we all seem to agree on, next winter is going to be very difficult. So I'm not coming to MCC next winter. But the long run, and here's my question, how long will it take the world to sort of get to a sustainable energy level with carbon neutral or whatever? And, you know, when we hear the Greens, they say, oh, we have 10 years, otherwise the world's going to blow up and disappear. Well, I don't believe any of that. But I think this transition is about 100 years. That's how long, you know, and we can now disagree. Maybe but it's not 1, it's not 5, it's not 10. So I'm not sure what the long game is. You know, how do we have to sell this to the public? What is the mix of energy? How is it best to achieve that? And I think the short run is going to take care of itself. It'll be hard, but we need to be thinking about the long term. And how do we get there over the next 50 to 100 years? And I'm not the one that knows the answer to that, but I think that is the question that is on the table.
But would you add a thought maybe on what Dr. Zachman said, more EU, deeper EU, grand energy deal? Would that bring us forward?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, good. Dr. Bacsa, please reflect on that as well. But maybe for us Hungarians, tell us, will we have gasoline if we don't have Russian gas anymore? We have one refinery, and I understand it can only use Russian oil.
So, which one first?
Maybe that one.
Okay, first regarding the fuel, the transportation fuel. I think good news is that crude is a better commodity than gas. It's easier to transport and it's easier to procure. So I think, and the prices can be more expensive, but for example, the crude is only 130, 140% more expensive than it was before. So not 10 times more expensive. So, and crude price is very much, how to say, it's a really flexible price. It's not a OPEC cartel, US secret deals based pricing or Gazprom based pricing. It's more, how to say, more market oriented, the crude pricing, although OPEC was created for the crude pricing set, but still I think it's better available. So first of all, in Hungary, we have the production capacity of MOL Group is covering roughly 85% of the domestic needs in normal time. So the oil production capacity is almost enough for all diesel consumption. It's enough for all gasoline consumption. So crude intake, 60-65% for the Hungarian refinery is the Russian, coming through the pipeline. The rest we are taking from the sea, seaborne, coming another pipeline, but an independent pipeline. By the way, the pipeline is ours. So the pipeline in Hungary is owned by us. It's not owned by someone else. The question is always that who owns the other side of the pipeline, which is coming. The Russian pipeline is coming through Ukraine, and the Ukrainian section is owned by the Ukrainian state. So, and it's still running, and it's still exempted. So practically, I think our supply is secured. We are now still overcoming the over-demand from the summer to fill up the storages, and we are also coping with the problem what the Schwechat meltdown caused in the region, that significant part of the production. So they decreased their production by 80%, and that quantity was seriously missing from this region. So, and we are preparing from the December and February further restrictions that Russian diesel won't be imported to Europe anymore, and only the pipeline import will stay for these refineries. All in all, I think we are secured. We have reserves and storages, plus we have the Adriatic pipeline via which we can switch to seaborne cargoes. Unfortunately, we have to prepare the refineries as well to switch from different grade, because light crude is less black products, less diesel, more gasoline. So we need to change the configuration. And
how many years and how much money?
I think it's 2 years, $500 million invested into old traditional refinery assets, not into the future. It's just
negotiating in Brussels. It was 5 years and $800 million. What happened? Anyway, okay.
No. That was practically, now we have 15 projects already, well calculated. We are calculating only to supply Hungarian refinery and Bratislava. The other one was also calculated with the Czech refineries, but we just our own refineries we calculate. I think that's now what we are saying. But on the other hand, I think going back to the previous one, is this big deal, or what would be the
more or less EU?
Yeah, more or less EU. I think. First of all, I also agree that always the lowest 40 or 50% is suffering the most, and that will be the case here as well. So they shall be protected as much as possible, and the solidarity at national level should definitely direct it to protect them, because otherwise the whole solidarity behind the European idea, the whole solidarity behind the democratic regimes will erode. So definitely we need to keep the peace in the society. The second one is that the problem with the big deals, that only the big voices are heard. The peripheric small voices are usually suppressed. So as saying that, okay, you will relocate, It's in big countries and big single markets. It's theoretically it's working, but when you go to the peripheries and you have 5 million, 2 million countries, 10 million countries, which are trying to keep themselves also prospering and can't accept that they are on the losing side and their industry will relocate to Spain or somewhere else. I mean, you cannot explain it to the voters or to your population. So it's a problem in terms of implementation. The other one in the big deals as well, for example, we here on the southeastern borders, we are more exposed to the Turkish routes than to the Nord Stream. We don't get anything from Baumgarten right now. So we are not getting a single drop of gas now from Baumgarten. So the Nord Stream is not supplying us. So but from Turkey towards Italy and towards Bulgaria, Hungary, and these directions, if there is no more Russian gas, then someone should say which other sourcing countries available. Europe, if Europe wants to make a big deal, then it should secure by a big supplier country to get it at an affordable price for a period which is needed to make all these transformation projects, all these sustainability investments, because we need to somehow bridge the gap between the new renewable world and the fossil world. And that one cannot be bridged by saying that no gas.
All right, just very short answer. Your grand deal, will it suppress the smaller countries?
Well,
Oh, no, wait, you get another question. Mr. Zachman. Very short.
Yep.
You understand the criticism?
No, I understand the criticism, but my understanding is that European institutions are there also to protect the rights of smaller member states. But of course, I mean,
sounds good, but
yeah, but
anyway, okay.
Complex.
Dr. Malinen, just say something positive.
Yeah. Well, actually, I do. I'm a big believer in technological progress, and I wholeheartedly agree that we need to have a long-run view here. So, but I studied economic growth and economic crisis for a little over 10 years in the academia, and the strangest thing is that economic growth usually appears when you remove politicians out of its way. So, like during crisis, if the country falls in a deep economic crisis, you get rid of the red tape, all that, let the markets function, and growth comes. So, I think that if we remove the European level green policies from the picture, we will be in well, self-sufficient in energy in very short time period, very fast, and pushing them through. Forcing the green policies through in this situation is a little bit the same thing if you have lost one leg and you're trying to cut your other leg with a hacksaw. Yeah, the same, yeah. So, okay, they are equal now, and then I'm shorter and in pain, even more pain. Doesn't make any freaking sense. And the thing is, when you ask about the European level thing, if you look at the current actions of our Politburo, or the European Commission, the unelected arm of whoever, and the head, von der Leyen, she seems like a...
Elected by the European Parliament.
Oh, yeah, right. She seems like a mad dog with rabies going around and parking, everybody who is not coming with the agenda of the European Union. So please, no more European Commission level.
All right,
collaboration.
so, green is the solution, green is death, but we will have enough gasoline, and we will see in 100 years. That was Dr. Ács's perspective. I think we can now switch to questions from the public.
Unless we died from the dog bite.
Right. Okay, we have some generic questions here, which maybe we don't need. Aha. Oh, I have one for Finland here. You get a really tough one here. Peat is not considered a renewable energy. It grows 1 millimeter a year. How exactly did Finland plan on using it? Who asked that question? Where is that Who knows about how fast peat grows? I want to know. Hands up. No one here? I'm from Estonia. Are you from Estonia? Well, welcome. Thank you.
So, no, it was not the idea that peat has to be grown back. It was just how you view it. And can you use it as an energy source, which basically didn't happen after the decision by, Satu Hassi. And we can go, I'm not an expert in peat either, but there are different things you can do with the peat fields and all that. But the main point was that don't throw away a major primary energy source just because there is one Green Party member who thinks it should be done.
All right, well,
Let me.
you know, usually I don't understand the answers, but here I don't even understand the questions, so some of them go on.
I think we can ask this question another way, right? If I go back 5 years, and I think this is right, we were making reasonable progress in energy, right, toward renewables. You know, Denmark was at 20%, Portugal's at 20%, the US, I think, is at 5%. So we were actually moving in the right direction. Right, then came COVID, and there was so much oil that I was storing it in my bathtub. Right, then came the war, and all of a sudden the bathtub got drained. And right, if I look at the world, there is no shortage of energy, right? But there's a European issue of getting energy in, right? And so I guess my question is, can we deal with this short run of 1 to 2 years and stabilize Europe and then get back to the longer term issue of this long-term transition?
All right, next question. I never heard of the European Hydrogen Bank, not to mention the 1 millimeter peat growing a year, but some of you may have heard of it. What's your opinion on it? That's the question. European Hydrogen Bank opinions.
I don't know.
Good, bad, does it exist?
It exists, yeah. No, it does not yet exist. It is one of the ideas of our beloved Commission President. The idea is to essentially underwrite hydrogen projects, and I mean, it's coming back to the question of how do we get energy into Europe, and the somewhat German and seemingly also in the Secretariat General of the Commission accepted idea is that we need to bring a lot of hydrogen into Europe. And I am rather siding with Georgi on the statement that hydrogen is extremely expensive, and especially it's very expensive to transport. So there might be a future for hydrogen in the sense of specific industrial processes that you cannot decarbonize with electricity, and there are a few that you can think of. And for them, hydrogen might be useful, but the question is also, does it then make sense to have these processes in Europe again, or can some of those processes happen where the sun and the wind is, which would make transportation much cheaper, because transporting hydrogen is a nightmare.
By the way, who asked that question? Someone's knowledgeable about hydrogen in here?
I don't think you should blame the people asking the question. You are making the choices.
All right, okay. What have we here?
Can I ask one? Why is it more difficult to transport hydrogen than natural gas?
I think natural LNG is cooled down to 160 degrees, and hydrogen needs significantly lower temperatures still. And so I think typically, currently, what people are thinking about transporting hydrogen is to transform hydrogen either in synthetic natural gas, so kind of add CO2 to this thing, and then have again LNG transported, which already is a waste of energy, or to transform it into ammonia, which has the advantage that you can use the ammonia then directly in the chemical processes potentially. The transportation costs are big, and the other question is in terms of capital cost in the locations where you produce it. Especially if it's kind of less developed countries, capital cost might be higher because of political risk. So, challenge then, does it make sense to import sun from the south when you have very high transport and capital cost, or does it make more sense to use the sun in Spain?
Can I ask another question? No.
All right.
Where do we stand on fusion?
I would argue, as always, 30 years ahead. So,
Is it the long run? Yeah, okay.
Anyone else wants to ask Mr. Zechman a question? So which one of you, you're all economists, right? Which one of you understands people best and politics? Any volunteers? You? You sure? All right. Okay.
I was
But
married
this question
to a
is made for
psychologist.
you. Actually, this question is made for you, but I don't want to hear the answer. I'm sure it's going to hurt. How will rising energy prices affect political regimes which rely on low costs, which, like Orban, which governments in Europe are possibly falling? The net question is, will Orban fall, I think?
I don't think so, but it will affect them badly, usually. But my advice to Hungary, then negotiate with Russia. Have the gas flowing. Swim alone, or we sink together.
So that wasn't the grand European energy deal we heard just now, I think. All right, and I'm not going to ask this one because it's again going to be Mr. Malinen. What have we?
I feel censored.
No, let's not go there. Who's the next person? Germany, Mr. Zechman again, huh? Germany has planned to reduce gas consumption by 15%, but in reality they only achieved a reduction of 3% during the last quarter.
I have different numbers, I must say, it's a nice question because next week we are publishing our gas demand tracker for all European countries, so you can look into gas demand on a hopefully monthly basis for each country, also on a sectoral level. Now for Germany, the numbers are something like 20% for the last months that we see, mainly based on lower industrial gas consumption. Point being there that we did not have much household consumption in the last months. Last week, there was a big spike in German gas consumption because of the cold weather that you also experience here. And the head of the German regulator was quite afraid because last week's consumption was 14% higher than previous years, but the temperature was like a mid-October and October temperature. Right. So overall, I think we are going in the right direction. The thing we don't know yet, and the kind of the $1,000,000 question, if you can really make a lot of money if you have the answer to that question right, is how much will household consumption in the European Union this winter react to the price signals?
Okay. Now, I have no idea about the figures, but maybe we should give the person who asked this question a chance to explain what he or she meant, she or he, by 3%. Is that person present who asked this question? Not here anymore, okay. Another one for Dr. Malinen. I think you have captured the audience. Does Finland, yet again, have alternative sources of energy to compensate Russian energy?
No, but we don't. The thing is that we don't actually need Russian energy this winter. We need Norwegian energy. That's all. Basically, but we have one new nuclear reactor that's coming online, and it's in the test use. If it get them fully running, we need only very little electricity from elsewhere. But we are not, thanks to Satu Hassi, we are not energy independent, no.
But maybe one thing to add, Finland had one very smart policy, that is they essentially forced every gas user that for heating purposes to also be able to switch to oil. So they essentially have a built-in resilience in the system, because they always knew if there's a problem with Russia, then we can switch to oil. So therefore, if you look into the demand numbers, Finland kind of has the hugest drop because they built in resilience into their energy system.
Yeah, the thing is that if Germans would have come to ask Finns advice how to deal with, Russian dependency and all that, we would not be here. The simple thing is that what Finland did for the past 100 years, we had strong military, and then we didn't give in Russians on anything like energy independence. The thing is that if really, this is no joke, but if the European Union would listen to old Finnish politicians more, we would not be in this mess. We survived next to an aggressive superstate for 70 years, independent. There is a play you have to play with the Russians, and it's quite simple actually.
Yeah, I think we should have a special Finnish Russia advisor in the European Commission. So, Dr. Bacsa, here's one for you. What are the plans for MOL Group to reduce energy usage?
I think, because the sentence is not completed, so energy usage by us, and or energy usage by our customers. So I think that one is that our own energy usage is because of the energy bills are now one of the top priority. So when we are prioritizing the projects, now it's on top of almost everything. One is the security of supply, so securing the supply of our assets, because besides refining, we are running the other, to be outsourced industry, the chemical industry as well. So practically in this region, we are the major chemical and oil players. The energy need of these assets, we put together all kind of projects. Our goals originally were up to 2030. We, of course, now accelerating. So we try to cut back not only CO2 emission to meet the climate goals, but now that was group-wide, we targeted 30% emission cut by 2030, which is enormous. If you think about that, these refining assets are not so easy to cut back. Usually we have to reconfigure product yield, and reconfiguring product yield also means that by the end of the decade, we will produce less fuel, more chemicals, and chemicals are mainly used in equipment, construction, household, food industry, everything. So it's not about energy, it's not an energy utilization anymore. So everywhere, so we are changing also our product portfolio, and we are changing the configuration, and we are making all energy efficiency investments to try to reduce heat consumption, because heavy industries are not so much focused on power. We have power. We are building renewable power plants or solar power plants. We are also analyzing wind plants wherever is the wind is strong enough. But definitely the other one is the steam, where you generate steam from, and that's why we went into the waste business, by the way, as well, that to have a real circular feedstock configuration, both for the energy making and also for the chemical business. So I think in general it won't happen one day to the other, but in this decade this is one of our key priorities.
Here's another oil question for you. Is it a fact that as a result of the oil embargo, European countries now buy Russian oil via other countries?
So I don't want to... I would rather say that there is definitely a region, or there are definitely countries which are benefiting a lot from this trade war, from this sanction policy of the EU. Two superpowers are benefiting a lot. One is US, the second is China. China is now and in short run will enjoy all the Russian natural resources and cheap energy supply. For the gas, it will take 3 to 5 years to take everything, which was not there.
But the question is, are
No.
Europeans cheating? Are they buying Russian oil just via other countries?
As first of all, we are
China.
no, we are buying Russian oil legally. So that's
the others.
that's one thing. The others, whether the other countries, like I don't want to name countries or traders, but definitely, for example, a crude is more traceable than a product. So whenever you go to the product, you don't see little flags on it, and practically a molecule of diesel is a molecule, and another molecule of diesel are very similar. A crude, by specification, even after blending, is easier to trace back that it has Russian crude origin, because crude is different in almost every geographical area. So in terms of crude, it's difficult to cheat. You will be caught at the end. In terms of product, I think that will be the name of the game. Indian refineries, Middle East refineries, Caspian, Black Sea refineries are all very well located. I don't say that they are doing, but they are very well located to run this model.
All right, very suggestive answer.
Yeah, I mean, two points on that. The first, there are no sanctions yet on Russian oil, so there is nothing to circumvent. The sanctions only start in December for crude and in February for products. What we have observed, and we have also a tracker of Russian oil imports by ship that we kind of base on satellite data, do on our website. What we see is Europe is last week for the first time imported less than 1 million ton of oil, while non-EU, non-G7 countries, so essentially India's and China's of the world, they are now significantly stronger importing of Russian oil than before. So we see that Russia is exploring new ways to bring out the oil to other countries, and whether some of that will come back as products to us is not yet clear. The second point that is important is we are now in discussion at the G7 level of what do we do starting from December, because people are rather afraid of the cliff if potentially the sanctions turn out to be really effective. Because if the sanctions are really effective, if not only the sanctioning of Europeans buying oil, but also European shipping oil, Europeans insuring the oil tankers get effective, we might slash 3 to 5% of the global oil market. And that might have quite significant effects on the global economy. So therefore, the Americans started this discussion with Minister Yellen essentially saying, okay, maybe we can find a way that the Russians are still allowed to sell this oil at lower prices to other parts of the world. And the problem here is that the Europeans are dug in their relatively strange position of saying, okay, we don't want to buy and we don't want to open anything up. I think we could benefit from the situation much better if the Europeans would say we impose a very strong tariff on importing Russian oil that allows our fiscal status to benefit from that. The Russians will lose out because they can sell at lower prices. They would still prefer to do that than shipping across the world to the Indians that will also ask for a lower price. So we would, with such a tariff idea, we would be much better off. This price cap idea of the Americans sounds very complicated. But it might be the way where we are going, and then we will see a lot of what Jürgi described in terms of circumvention and reblending, and I mean that will be a mess.
But we need the input of Dr. Bacsa on this one. Price caps, tariffs on oil imports, good or bad?
In general, I think price caps are very harsh measures. So it's whether it's EU, global, or so price caps are distorting the market. And if price cap stays with us long run, the beneficiaries of the price caps are unpredictable, and maybe we are benefiting those industries, those players, which were not planned. And that's why the structural changes can happen in the market, which are not going to the right directions. I think price caps can be done as a temporary measures.
We're talking about European tariffs.
I don't know, that's why I say that. Price cap is meaning that you set an artificial cap. And if it's too low, then definitely you cut in the flesh of the economy. And then you are killing the financial reserves of certain parts, which are healthy, and there will be enjoyers who don't really want to stay with you longer. But cheap gas, cheap crude, cheap whatever will make industries booming, which should not be at that level. So it's like in a planned economy. The other one is the tariff. Tariff is, of course, if a tariff is discriminative, that's kind of very selective. And for example, if I don't really have now available other option, and I am paying most of the tariff into the budget, it's detrimental to me. So that's why I said tariff is a better tool or more market-friendly tool, but tariff can also be discriminative if at the end it's only one or two goods which are paying that tariff. If you say that you increase the tariff on certain energy imports, you increase the tariff, or you have or like the special taxes. We always said profit-based special taxes are fine for extra profit period if you use it for purposes which are at the best interest of the society or the economy. But if there is really extra profit, if there is no extra profit, then you are just increasing the burden, and the companies or the industries will move away, will find something better place to stay.
Okay. I think we have to give you a second to react to that, if you want to, only if you want to.
Just on wording for price caps, I meant kind of these global price caps in terms of what the Yellen proposal is, not so much and it's very difficult to follow all the debate that is going on because everything is currently called a price cap, even so it's neither to do with a price nor with capping. But for this oil price cap from proposal from Yellen, I mean, I share your concerns that it is going to be very distortive and complicated. And for the tariffs, I also understand the Hungarian concerns and your company's concern. Makes a lot of sense that kind of if there's only a few countries that are really kind of completely hooked up to that, and they then have to pay the bill, that doesn't sound fair. But I think there are European solutions to be found to compensate such problems. I would find it very strange that we go for a third best option simply because we didn't manage to kind of find a way to share the gains or the pain among each other.
Okay, we have 3 minutes and we have 2 options here. I can ask an intelligent question about Repower EU, or I can ask the question that I didn't want to read out 10 minutes ago. What do we do? Shall we vote on it? What? Repower, good. Okay. Will the Repower EU initiative be accomplished as proposed in February? Can renewable energy cover for lack of Russian gas imports next year? Volunteers, please. But maybe Repower EU, maybe Dr. Zachman, this is your area?
Yes and no. The challenge with the Repower EU is a kind of a communication document that lines out what should be done, and the heads and state and government said, okay, we broadly agree with that, but in the end, it's the member states that have the prerogative on the energy sector. There's an article in the European treaties, 194, that says member states are about to deal with their fuel mix, so member states will have to implement the things that are there, and the EU has neither put money, because they don't have any own money, into this thing, nor did they put in very strong legal requirements, because they don't have the competency. So the problem is here that it's an okay-ish plan. I think it gets the priorities right in terms of, in the short term, kind of getting through the problem, and in the longer term, investing ourselves out of the problem, which we already identified here on the panel as the right approach. But in terms of kind of material behind, it's still relatively weak. One topic we have looked deeply into is the question of joint gas procurement, which is also part of the Repower EU. And yeah, the EU has set up working groups and departments to deal with that, but I don't see the EU being able to buy a single LNG cargo. So that's the member states that are kind of not wanting the EU to take a stronger role, and here we are just living into the institutional constraints of Brussels.
Short positive comment.
You have 45 seconds.
I'm a major champion of humanity. There is no such problem we couldn't solve if we put our heads together. This is the long history of humanity has shown this. But the only problem is currently that policies are obstructing us from doing that. So we have to get together as humans all over to solve this difficult period we have in head.
There's very little to be said against that, I would suppose. Thank you, gentlemen, for this very interesting, fascinating discussion. I hope you have been satisfied in the public, and I would ask you to applaud the experts on the podium.